You're joining me on this beautiful morning. I wanted to welcome you to our conversation, a dialogue that I wanted to start on mental health crisis and its impact on workplace safety and well-being. I'm going to take just a moment or two here and pause in order to allow everybody else to sign on. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my audio fully set up. All right. We're going to plug in this audio source so everybody can hear me well. Let's, again, like I said, just pause another moment just to make sure that everybody that was intending to join had an opportunity to do so. So let me go ahead and go to this event right here. So I can track the comments and anything else that is happening. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Well, good morning. I just wanted to provide enough time for anybody that has or wanted to join us has an opportunity to do so. Give it another second or two and we'll get things going. So let me find that. Okay. Okay. Well, good morning once again. I'm Simon Goncharenko. So glad to have you all join us this morning. I wanted to spend a little bit of time and talk for a little bit about something that is really going on in our world and something that, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully you can see that at this particular point. So I wanted to talk for the next few minutes about something that's been escalating, something that's been on the minds of a lot of people that you and I know, something that has touched all of our workplaces, something that has touched many, if not most, of our families. An issue that has been a taboo to talk about for a long time, and yet something that is still going on, whether we talk about it or not, right? It's the whole issue of mental well-being, mental health, and as a safety practitioner, and that kind of brings me to the disclosure part of this conversation. Before we go any further, I wanted to just make a small disclosure. I do realize that in the days since I've scheduled this event to just spend a little bit of time and talk about this important issue, in the days since I've done that, I've had a lot of people that have gone on my profile and viewed my profile. And a lot of these have been mental health professionals and licensed mental health professionals and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to make sure that I'm not trying to trying to come across as anything different than what I am. So I just wanted to tell you offhand that I'm not a licensed mental health professional. What am I, and what makes me qualified to lead this conversation? Well, first of all, I'm a researcher with a terminal degree. I am professionally trained in doing research and digging up the truth and seeing where that information leads us. That's first and foremost. Second of all, I am a certified health and safety professional. And as a certified health and safety professional, but also a health and safety practitioner, I have seen the impact that these issues cause and have in the workplace safety. And also, as someone, as a practitioner, I have been diving deeper into this issue over the last 5 years or so, looking at mental well-being, looking at mental health, looking at what we need to do to have a more holistic approach to our understanding of health and safety. And so that's the other thing that qualifies me. Perhaps another qualifier that may be overlooked in our day and age, but as I thought about this situation, I think is no less important, is that I'm also a father of four. And as my oldest is now 22, and then I have children of ages 20, 17, and 13, I have an opportunity to see how a lot of these issues play out. And some of the things that we're going to talk about, I have an opportunity to see them firsthand as far as their reception, as far as the mentality, and these types of things. And so those are just a few of the ways in which I have seen and get to see and experience these issues kind of firsthand. And so what we're going to discuss is what I've seen, what I've researched, and hopefully some of the ways that it's going to resonate with what you guys have been seeing. So what are we going to talk about? Mental health crisis and its impact on workplace safety and overall well-being. At first, when I first started looking at this over the last 2 years, we've had, I don't need to tell you, our lives have been rocked really by initially the coronavirus pandemic, and the way that a lot of our governments and the way that a lot of our medical institutions, a lot of our really just public services and institutions around the world have handled it. It really has developed, in a sense, now 2 years later, I see, into almost a dual pandemic. If you look at any research and see any doctors, they will tell you that you have the COVID, which is the initial pandemic that sort of started the whole thing. But you also have, and as a lot of doctors are agreeing, a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists are seeing, you have almost an equal pandemic right now, and that is pandemic of fear, that people are starting to question us. So that's the initial thing that has caused a lot of us to really do some soul searching. And I pulled up just a few facts as I was kind of doing research on that, and I'm seeing that this pandemic has affected the mental health, for example, in the US, of 59% of the people in the United States. So that's over half. I mean, that's a big deal, right? Over half of the population here in the US have been impacted by the mental health of them have been impacted by this pandemic. And it's not obviously true to US only. You look at the Australia, for example, and the research that was done there just a few months ago suggests that construction workers are 6 times more likely to die from suicide than from a workplace accident. And by the way, what I didn't mention from the very beginning that I wanted to also lead in, I said to you that I was a practitioner, right, in this area. But what I didn't mention is that at this particular point, I find myself as a practitioner in the field, in a construction industry that sees it's only the second highest industry in the world in the numbers of suicide. And so you have here an interesting data coming from this particular industry from Australia, where this is a real issue. This is a real issue. And then, we go to the UK and we see the information coming from there. The UK government's lockdown stipulated severe restrictions in social contact and the ability for many people to work, greatly reduced access to services. And so the early indications so far suggest a serious impact on employment and livelihood, income, personal debt. And you can imagine all of these things add up, right? And so coupled with a substantial amount of worry about future insecurity, there are increasing concerns about the mental health sequelae of the pandemic in the UK. So again, these are not my words. These are the words of the researchers that spent their entire livelihoods or their entire lives diving into these issues. So when it comes to the pandemic, there were increased rates of psychological distress among US adults in April 2020 compared with those 2 years prior. And the increase was greatest in young people, ages 18 to 24, and women. So you can see that these two segments of the population, the younger people and women, have been affected even greater than the other segments of the population. Although COVID-19 presents the greatest physical health risk to older people, and we've been hearing that for the last 2 years, the mental health of the young might be disproportionately affected by transmission mitigation strategies in the pandemic response of government. So we've sort of lived through the law of unintended consequences, right, over the last couple of years. In order to stop, in order to pause, in order to arrest the development and the spread of this virus around the world, what we've done is we've taken some measures that have inadvertently triggered a lot of worse repercussions, from whether it's economic repercussions or mental health repercussions. And so these are not my words. Again, these are the words of many of the researchers that you will find out there. COVID-19 may ultimately have a greater negative impact on our mental health than on our physical health. And again, that's what doctors are finding. And so as we're looking at this kind of stuff, that's where we need to be realizing that all of these effects and all of these people that are experiencing that, people that are struggling with that, they come to our workplaces. And we started out with COVID. Then we had some interesting developments in Canada that we had watched for the previous 3 or 4 weeks, and there were people on different sides of this, and some were really excited about it. Others were more anxious about it. And again, you have more of a contribution to the old global mental health, right? Because this started in Canada and it kind of spread around the world. You saw the news of these same types of demonstrations happening in New Zealand and Australia and France, Netherlands, and sort of spread around the world. And then, interestingly enough, after we scheduled this event, you have an interesting thing going on here that just started last week, and that is the development of the invasion on Ukraine. And so that's another situation where it's just been devastating. I have actually been in touch with people, younger people, that have reached out to me and said, I'm really anxious about this. I'm really thinking about this. I can't stop looking at the news. And so that's been overwhelming. And the images that we see on my screen, these are the images coming from Ukraine right now, where people's lives are impacted. And we thought that here we are in 21st century, way too advanced for this type of warfare and for these types of images. And yet, once again, these are the things that are crossing our screens. These are the things that are showing up in our feeds. And how do you deal with that? When you see images like this, it just really tugs at your heart, and it really makes it hard for you to figure out what to do with this. So, it's interesting because the world was really not set up to respond to the growing mental health crisis before COVID-19, and it's not now. Prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, global statistics on mental health conditions were already bleak. The global economy loses more than $1 trillion per year due to depression and anxiety. Mental health conditions contribute to 25% of years lived with disability in the world. Depression is a leading cause of disability, affecting 264 million people. And around half of all mental health conditions start by age 14. 14! And suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people ages 15 to 29. That's where we are. That's why we need to have these conversations. Every 40 seconds, someone dies by suicide. Think about that. Think about that. That is where we are. And that is why it is so important for us to have a conversation about it. That is why it's so important for us to talk about it. That is why it's so important for us to be able to have a discussion about this. But it's also why it's so important for us in the workplaces to know what it is that we're dealing with. More than 1 in 5 people living in settings affected by conflict. Again, we just saw some of the pictures of that. Suffer from a mental health condition, and people with severe mental health disorders die 10 to 20 years earlier than the general population. So, what is mental well being? Let's talk about that for just a minute. Well being refers to how you feel about yourself, your life, and how well you're able to function. Well being is important, it's fundamental to your happiness, health, motivation, and ability to overcome day to day challenges. What can affect my well being? Well, really a whole range of interlinking factors, including mental, physical health, employment, living conditions, social issues, indications. And in fact, if you look on the right side of the screen, and you can relate with this, there are numerous parts to our well-being, or there are different aspects to our well-being. As I said on the left side, there's physical health, there's emotional well-being, and it's important to be grounded emotionally in order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to relate, in order to be able to function in the world in which we live. And then there's spiritual well-being. The longer I live, the more I realize that you have to be grounded in what you believe. You have to know what you believe in order to be able to function and move forward. For me, what I know, what I'm grounded in, is my faith in Jesus Christ as my Savior. And so that is what grounds me and what allows me to know how to interpret the world, to know how to understand what's going on, and to know how to function in a way that makes sense. There's social well-being. That is, by the way, the sector, that is the portion that we've already discussed, we've really been impacted over the last couple of years. And financial well-being, our financial well-being has been impacted quite drastically as well. And so these two areas have been, as well as work and careers, a lot of companies move to working from home. Those areas have been greatly impacted. But if we tie our well-being only to our physical health, then we have a very simplistic and a very siloed, if you will, understanding of what well-being is. It's important for us to understand how many different aspects play into that. Well-being is related, as I mentioned, to chronic health conditions. For example, if you find yourself working 55 or more hours per week compared to 40 hours, I don't know if you realize that, but this type of workload, or this overextension, is associated with a 35% higher risk of stroke, 17% higher risk of dying from ischemic heart disease. So these are just some factors that are impacted as far as our overall well-being by our physical factors and by our work factors. There's another connection, very important connection, between well-being and sleep. I'm sure you know this. I'm not the first one to tell you that sleep is essential for good health. Yet, the world that we live in, both from the amount of work that we have to do a lot of times, as well as from the amount of information that is invading our living spaces, from all the social media streams, from all the media streams, from all the news sources, from all the notifications that we have set on our watches and our phones and this and that and the other, that impacts sleep. People have lost the ability to sleep well over the last 2 years. But we need to understand how important it is, because during sleep, our body cells are re-energized, our toxic waste cells and chemicals are cleared from the brain. Nerve cells communicate and reorganize. And this allows the brain to process the information taken in through the conscious periods and to consolidate and form acute, accurate memories, which, of course, in turn supports learning. And so that all of that happens in sleep. Levels of adrenaline and corticosteroids drop, and the body starts to produce human growth hormone, HGH, which is important for repairing muscles and tissue. Other changes to hormones occur which help you regulate mood, appetite, libido. All of these things, if you're having issues with appetite, mood swings, libido, and those kinds of things, that's impacted by sleep. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about. I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. And I'm sure you can think to many times in your life when you were sleep deprived and you found yourself overreacting in stressful situations. That's connected. That there's a direct correlation between that. And then there's stress. I think if I polled you right now and asked you whether you were stressed, each and every one of you would say, absolutely, I'm stressed. And that is where we are right now. That is where our whole world is. And just checking to make sure that we're tracking. And so let me make sure. Okay. And so stress is another factor there that I wanted to make sure that we were talking about as well. We all experience it, right? And I don't know if you realize it, but stress is another interesting thing or an interesting concept. A long time ago, when a lot of these stressful situations, when our ancestors lived closer to the land, right? And stress meant that you needed to, maybe an attack was imminent, maybe there were wild animals or enemy forces or something like that. If you study the effects, and I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm going to tell you, anyone can access this information. If you study the effects of stress on your body, or what effects cause stress, stress causes, right? Where you have all kinds of different adrenaline type of hormones that are raised in your body. Your breathing actually becomes fast and shallow to allow you, right, to have the energy that you need to be able to either fight or flight, right? To either fight and face the danger head on, or to retrieve as fast as possible for the preservation of life. And so if these types of internal changes, of these types of systemic changes when it comes to our body were necessary back in the time when stress meant a physical danger, when stress meant a physical threat, then think about this. A lot of the stressful situations today, I may turn on the news. I may open my phone and look at what's coming. I may get a notification on my watch, and it may stress me out instantly. And that stressor, right, today, without any physical situations, without any physical threats present, that stressor will cause the exact same body reactions, to where all of a sudden now my breathing is shallow and fast, and all of these other adrenaline and hormones are actually going on in my body. All of this internal response is going on. And how do I deal with that? I may be sitting at my desk, or I may be at my office, where I have to be able to respond. I have to be able to know how to slow it down. So the first thing, obviously, is awareness. And the second thing is when your watch tells you to breathe, that's actually a really, really helpful advice. Just sometimes just focusing on your breathing for a minute or two, just focusing on your breathing allows you to regulate your breathing and some of those other responses. But again, that's important for us to know and to be able to help as far as our workplaces are concerned. Here's another one that's interesting. The American Dental Association reported that in 2020 and 21, over the last year and a half, there have been an increased, just a tremendous 90% increase in the complaint of jaw pain. Why do you think that is? Well, because we grit our teeth and we're stressed. And so that's just a physical, a very specific and clear show, I guess, a very clear way that we can see that we are stressed. In other studies, doctors have found that stress actually shrinks brain networks. What does that mean? Well, that means that when I find myself in a stressful situation, or if I continue to stay in stressful situations, there are many effects, as we've already discussed, are on my ability to think clearly, but at least two that you need to know about, need to be aware of. One is the amount of options available to me that I can take for a decision that I need to make are actually fewer, or I can think of fewer options than there actually are out there. That's what happened when my brain networks are shrunk. And the second thing, the amount of time that I have to make a decision is greatly reduced to where now I feel like I have less time and fewer options to make decisions. And that translates into catastrophe, doesn't it? Because I'm not going to make a good decision when I have to make it in a rush and with much fewer options than actually are available there. Again, that is something that can have a direct effect on our workplaces. That can have a direct effect on the injuries and incidents and those kinds of things, and that can happen in the workplaces. Because as we look at our health and safety programs, we're not really incorporating it holistically. What can I do if I'm feeling stressed? There are lots of different things that we can do. You can track your stressors. You can develop healthy responses. Act early. That's very important. Tackle things before stress gets out of control and back brain takes over. If you don't, there are some things in life, and there are some people in life, some temperaments that tend to kind of put things off, and they tend to just delay things in hope that these issues and hope that these problems will go away. Well, it doesn't work with stress that way. If you put it off, it doesn't go away. It just escalates. And again, escalates. Speak to your manager about excessive workloads and concerns. Speak to someone if you need to do something about that. And divide your workload into small and achievable chunks. That can help, and establish boundaries as well as taking time to recharge. That work-life balance, we've had this conversation for a very long time, but it is especially important right now, especially to you, especially to your coworkers, especially to those who have the mental health issues and who are struggling with some of these issues. So taking time to recharge is really important. And please reach out. Many of our organizations, many of our companies that you're a part of actually have mental health resources. There are numbers that you can call. There are trained individuals that you can speak with. So reach out and look into that. Those are resources that many times you're not aware. And if you are a health and safety practitioner listening to me and joined into this, I challenge you to research the resources the organization has. I know it's not exactly your boat. It may not be exactly your cup of tea or part of what your department does, but we're all in this together. And that can change a life, that can save a life, just your ability to know and to point people in the right direction. What do we do when well-being is not well? So this is just a quick summary of some of the most common mental health disorders that we see around us. Anxiety disorders are characterized by persistent worry, fear, and stress that interferes with one's everyday life. Anxiety disorders are actually the most common mental health illness in the US, and it affects about 40 million adults in the United States, ages 18 and older, or about 18.1% of the population every year. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, yet only 37% of those suffering actually receive treatment. So people with anxiety disorders are 3 to 4 times more likely to go to doctor and 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders than those who don't suffer from anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders develop from a complex risk of factors, including genetics, brain chemistry, personality, and life events. So be on the lookout for those that might be suffering from that so you can offer lend a helping hand. Depression is a persistent low mood, fatigue, and profound sadness, and prominent symptoms of these are some of the prominent symptoms of major depression. It's sobering when you look at the statistics around us. Until I was preparing for this dialogue, I wasn't aware that about 1 in every 10 citizens of my country, the United States, take an antidepressant to treat various mental health disorders. And we've been talking about how this whole issue has been really exacerbated over the last 2 years. And it's interesting because you can see that even in the prescriptions, right? Over the last 2 years, nearly 1/3 of people taking antidepressants in 2020 had no history of use 6 months prior to their first antidepressant prescription. Isn't that interesting? What an incredible lift, what an incredible rise in numbers there. That's just really overwhelming to just even look at this. Substance use disorders, the frequent use of alcohol and or drugs that interferes with a person's behavior in day-to-day life. And that is one area where we can talk about for a very long time. Among Americans aged 12 and older, I want you to listen to this statistic. I didn't say 18 and older. I didn't say 16 and older. I said 12 and older. That in and of itself should be just incredibly sobering. 31.9 million are current illegal drug users used within the last 30 days. 11.7% of Americans 12 and over use illegal drugs. 53 million. That's 20% of our population of people 12 and over have used illegal drugs or misused prescription drugs within the last year. That is a really big problem, and you need to be very aware of that. Bipolar disorder consists of radical shifts in depressive or low moods and manic high moods that can last week long. And someone who has close family members, and that is something that I'm sure you have seen. There are very well-known singers. There are very well-known celebrities. Kanye, for example, is one of them who suffers from this. And you can see how some of the decisions that they make when they're not staying with their medication just end up being self-destructive and end up being really hurtful to a lot of people around them. And so that's something you need to be aware of. Schizophrenia is a chronic and severe mental disorder that affects a person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And you can do more research on that. Eating disorders are illnesses that affect a person's relationship with food and body image. And that is something that, as research points out, more prevalent among women. But that is something that I have seen very closely as well, and can be devastating. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, is a chronic, long-lasting anxiety disorder where a person experiences unreasonable, uncontrollable, recurring thoughts followed by a behavioral response. And then you have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. That is something that's been in the news a lot. A disorder that develops in someone who have experienced a shocking or dangerous event and have difficulty recovering from the trauma that that event caused. Anxiety, depression can destroy ideas, energy, and eventually the economy, and especially small businesses where so many of us are employed. So it's important for us as caregivers, as caretakers, as employers, as health and safety practitioners, as just responsible citizens, to have some of this information so that we can know how we can be of assistance. When you look at 2020 mental health by the numbers, you can see that, as I've already mentioned, among the US adults, 1 in 5 experienced a mental illness. 1 in 20 experienced a serious mental illness. 1 in 15 experienced both a substance use disorder and mental illness. And by the way, a lot of these, on the previous slide, a lot of these disorders that I was mentioning, they don't come alone. They actually come in pairs, or they come combined with others as well. And you can see that 12 plus million people had serious thoughts of suicide. Many struggles to get necessary and struggle to this day to get necessary mental health care, with telehealth proving an essential option. And many, as I mentioned just a second ago, continue to increasingly use alcohol or drugs to cope with stress or self-medicate. And by the way, as I mentioned, as I've seen in my own family, when people that actually have real mental health disorders start to self-medicate, that never goes right, that never goes well. And that's just something that we need to be aware of. And the ripple effect of mental health illness, it doesn't just usually stay with a person or a family. It has an impact on the community. It has an impact on the world. People with serious mental health illness have an increased risk for chronic disease like diabetes or cancer. At least 8.4 million Americans provide care to an adult with an emotional or mental illness, and caregivers spend an average of 32 hours per week providing unpaid care. 21% of people experiencing homelessness also have a serious mental health illness. That's how we see it affects our community. 37% of people incarcerated in state and federal prison have a diagnosed mental health conditions. Depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide. It has a ripple effect. So what do we do? And we'll have a slide that actually talks about it a little bit more, even specifically. But first of all, I wanted to make sure that if you are suffering with any of these issues, if you know anyone that is struggling with any of these issues, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34 in the US. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the US. And the overall suicide rate in the US has increased by 35% in the last 20 plus years. 46% of the people who die by suicide had a diagnosed mental health conditions. And 90% of people who die by suicide had shown symptoms of mental health condition, according to interviews with family friends. That's why it's important for us to know what these are so that we can see, even if they refuse to talk, even if they refuse to identify, we can still recognize some of these things. And that's why it's important for us to understand this. What are some of the behavioral suicide warning signs? If you see someone becoming isolated or someone displaying sudden changes in mood or behavior, abusing drugs or alcohol, maybe suicide attempt or act of self-harm, difficulties at school or work, dropping out of activities, maybe disinterest in usual activities, sleeping or eating difficulties, high-risk behaviors such as driving a car at high speed. When it comes to physical signs that you can look for, even if someone doesn't talk about it, neglecting their appearance, neglecting personal hygiene or clothing or both, persistent physical complaints like chronic pains, weight loss or weight gain due to appetite loss or gain, tired or finding it difficult to concentrate due to change in sleeping pattern. The feelings that someone has as a warning sign of a suicide is depression, hopelessness, and helplessness, and failure, and feeling like life is just not worth living. And the thoughts are more gloomy and negative thoughts. They're unable to find solutions to problems. And people tend to be very self-critical. Just be watching for those. In every country, there are usually established suicide prevention lifelines. The number on screen, 1-800-273-8255 or TALK, is the number here in the US. Or you can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Here in the United States, I know there is an effort to make the suicide prevention lifeline an actually 3-digit number by this summer. And I know around different countries around the world, there have been at least 10 different countries from which the participants have registered for this event. And I know that you have your own numbers. So as a health and safety professional and practitioner, it would be in your best interest, in the best interest of your company, whatever position you are, to know what these resources are, to know what this number is, to know what this website is, so that you can counsel your employees. Perhaps the two biggest messages that I wanted to leave that I think is very important for us to communicate to people that have been impacted is that you are not alone. When we're depressed, when we suffer from mental health conditions, when we have suicidal thoughts, the number one lie, if you will, that we find ourselves believing in is that I'm the only one that feels that way. The whole world does not understand, and it would just be easier and better if I ended all of that. And you're not alone. The statistics, the reason I took such a painful time and went through all of these statistics was not just to show you what's going on, but to show you that this is an issue that so many people are impacted with. You're not alone. And that is the message that we need to be very clearly communicating to people. And the second thing that we need to communicate to someone is talk to someone. Talk to someone, reach out. It may be your employer. It may be your supervisor. It may be your spiritual advisor. It may be your pastor. It may be a counselor or a doctor that you see on a regular basis. It may be a friend. And it may be someone, if you live in a country, or if you live in a place where it is still stigmatized to talk about these issues. Thankfully, we live in the age of the internet where you can pick up your phone and you can reach out over the phone, over the internet, to someone that will help you, to someone that will walk through with you. And from the organizational perspective, um, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know, but I'm going to repeat to you once again that we can't fix workplace safety when we continue to operate in the way that so many of our companies are still operating today. And that is a very siloed mentality where HR is right here and health and safety is right here. And all the different organizational parts are operating independently of each other. They don't communicate. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. We cannot fix workplace safety that way. We live in a time, in a day and age when we realize that all of this is interrelated, and so what can we do? According to Gallup research, awareness of the crisis, getting out ahead of it. The big solutions can be found in prevention. Okay, that's the first thing, the very important thing. The second thing is take immediate action to address, treat, and if possible, reverse the condition once a person is experiencing any kind of anxiety disorder. As far as a holistic approach to workplace safety, we have to understand, as I mentioned a second ago, that these areas are interconnected. What I as an individual bring, my competence, my skills, my personality, my attitudes, my risk perception, my mental well-being, I bring all that with me to the workplace. I can't separate that from where I am. And that blends in with my organizational culture, with the resources, the organizational how work patterns. And that blends in turn with the tasks and the workloads and the environment and the display and controls and all of these things. And so all of that is interrelated. And the only way that we can tackle this is as a workplace health and safety professional, we have to be at least able to converse. We don't have to be mental health experts. We don't have to be licensed mental health professionals, though if you'd like to pursue some more education in that and knowledge in that area, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the very least, we have to be well versed in these areas. We have to be able to conversate in these areas. We have to be able to relate and know that all of these areas have an impact on our workplace safety. I won't keep you much longer. Just wanted to really, more than anything, what this conversation was about is not much more than just the awareness. A couple of slides ago, we talked about how according to the Gallup research, the two things that you can do, one is awareness, second is taking immediate action. And so in the awareness scheme, as far as the awareness part of it is concerned, I have actually developed a 1 to 2 day seminar that looks at at all of these different aspects: mental well-being, safety, leadership, communication, and even the way that your brain operates. And it looks at all of these different aspects, and it provides some tips. It provides a self-awareness, if you will, and what it causes, the practical outcomes of that is your personnel is trained in discovering how their personal lives and off-the-job behaviors affect their on-the-job safety. And they realize that even on their best day, humans' brain can play tricks on them. And so there's a need to follow your processes, your procedures, your SOPs and MOPs, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to just raise awareness. I wanted to spend a little bit of time raising some of these issues because these issues are being talked about all around us. And I think it's time for our workplaces to start talking about these issues. Wanted to, again, just hopefully get your mind going and get you thinking in this direction. This is who I am. I am Safeguard Solutions, LLC. And you have my number. You have my email address and website. Would love to talk to you further. Would love to talk about these aspects. Would love to be able to come to your organization and do some of this training that kind of help people connect the dots and understand how much these different aspects really do have an impact on the workplace health and safety. Thanks for hanging out with me. I've enjoyed it, and I hope that this has raised the level of awareness. We can continue the conversation, even though I'm going to end the live stream, but that does not mean the conversation has to be over. We can continue the conversation on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me, and feel free to post your comments, post your questions, post your thoughts, and we can interact there to continue to keep the conversation going. Thanks so much. Have a safe day, and be aware. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.